provided of help for the weary soul. Say on and hope for some broken hearts. His time, He'll make us whole. 'Cause we're healing, healing, healing in the hands of time. We're all healing, healing, healing in the hands of time. He's taken us all on a journey. He knows exactly every inch of this road. If we could only see farther down it, we would know, as He knows, that we're all healing, healing, healing in the hands of time. We're all healing, healing, healing in the hands of time. If it's much too big today to handle, just hand it all over to Him. Father Time, Master of surprises, will surprise us once again. 'Cause we're all healing, healing, healing in the hands of time. We're all healing, healing, healing in the hands of time. Healing, healing, healing in the hands of time. We're all healing, healing, healing in the hands of time. Healing in the hands of time. Ooh,
So, St. Patrick's Day, one of the things that I love about St. Patrick's Day is how it unites the world. To see all these different monuments from around the world all painted green, it helps to bring with it a sense of unity. Even something that started as a Catholic holiday or an Irish holiday has now spread, as Eblevio said, to non-Irish, non-Catholic, non-this, non-that, and people have embraced it the world over. And when we look at St. Pat, there is a whole lot of different things to look at with this. First, ironically, the color didn't used to be green for St. Patrick's Day. It was blue, because that was the primary color of the English flag. And he was an Englishman, born and raised till he was 16, and sold in slavery and moved to Ireland. And at the time, if you wore too much green, green was declared the color of the fairy folk. And so if children wore too much green, the folklore said that the fairies would come wipe up your child and carry them away to fairyland. So up until about 100 years ago, people didn't wear much green at all, and especially on St. Paddy's Day was the day to not wear any green, because you didn't want to tempt the fairy folk to steal your children. And it's amazing how things kind of change over time. Now, when I hear the story of St. Patrick, and I look at what I can learn, what we can learn from this, there are several things that jump right out. The first is that we never know what God's plan is for us. I'm certain that when he was a young person, a 16-year-old that was sold into slavery and transported across an ocean over to Ireland and was treated extremely poorly as a slave, and his job was to tend the sheep, and he did that for 6 years. And at the time he considered himself an atheist. And he was sold into a Druid chieftain who, I'm sure, showed the Druid ways of doing things for that 6 years. That he wasn't thinking, gosh, how can God use me? How can this This isn't the life I signed up for. This isn't what life was supposed to be. From 16 to 22, he was a poorly treated slave. Now, we all have different times in our lives that we can relate to some form of POW camp. Whether it was an emotional thing that we went through, a physical thing, a financial thing, a life's kicking my butt thing, that for some of us has lasted days or weeks or months or years, depending on when it was and what the circumstances were. And during those times, we don't often think that can be used in some way at some time. We think we just got to endure it. And we all get out of that state in different ways. When you hear the story of St. Patrick, what had happened to him was, there he was, being a slave, and being poorly treated, and just assuming this is my lot in life. And he heard in his head the voice of God that said, escape today, go that way, and there will be a boat. Now, how many times do we hear guidance that says, here is the way out of the thing that you're in right now? Do this, do it right now, go do this. And how, most of us, do we listen to that, or do we dismiss it away? It's just a voice in my head, probably just my imagination, let me rationalize it away. Now imagine how different St. Patrick, or Maywood at the time, as he was called, how different his life would have been had he not listened to God's voice when it came in his head and said, go that way, go till you get wet, and there will be a boat waiting for you. Had he said, that's probably just my imagination. That's probably not God right there talking. That's just something in my head. That's just wishful thinking. He would have lived all his days as a slave and died as a slave. Instead, he followed God's word. He followed that voice in his head. He went to the shore, and by goodness, there was a boat. And he got on that boat, and he went all the way back to England. And he wasn't a slave. And he went into a monastery, and he began to study, and he began to get closer to God. And he studied for many years. And when he gets done with his study, the Catholic Church said, okay, dude, we're going to send you back to Ireland. Now imagine, man, I spent 6 years there as a slave, I was treated this way, I was thought of that way, now you want to send me back as a man of God to convert a country? Oh, you don't know how those folks think about me there. You don't know how the feelings of being there are going to affect me. But instead he said, oh, okay, if that's what you got for me, I'll go do it. And he went back to Ireland, and he began to talk and to teach and to build churches and schools and this and that, and really doing all that he was there to do for 30 years. Now, during the course of that time, when we've had things go on in our lives where we feel like someone has oppressed us, someone has not treated us right, and we finally escaped, we finally got out of that situation, most of us would have hard feelings towards the person who did us wrong, especially did us wrong as a slave and abused us for 6 years. Patrick, however, thought something different. He thought, because I was sold to this man, when I escaped, when I ran away, I took money out of his pocket. I need to go back and pay my former slave owner for what he bought me for, that he was out when I ran away. Imagine that for a second. That's just, when you really think about that, that's just mind-blowing. I mean, we think about the people who have oppressed us in different ways throughout our life, and we tend to think, well, my job is to forgive them. And maybe at some point, if I've forgiven enough, I can make peace with this, and then I can move on. And oftentimes we don't consider the other person's point of view and what their loss has been. And he did. And he went back to his former slave owner with the gold that he would have been worth to buy himself, to buy his own freedom from X amount of years ago. And that person's, close that door, the dude's working on their boat. And his former owner heard that Patrick was coming, heard that he was going to pay him for himself. And the man's pride couldn't take it. Couldn't take it. So he loaded up all his treasures, poured all of his treasures into his house, lit it on fire, and jumped into the flames. Now that's quite a little story there. Yeah, when we tend to think about St. Paddy's Day, we think of green beer and rivers dyed green and saloon songs and pub songs and what was it, corned beef and hash or cabbage. Right? We tend to think of these things, these symbols, and it's really no different than when we think of most other holidays and we look at the reasons why we do the things we do, why we think the things we think, and what's the underlying message of what's really going on. And what's really going on with St. Patrick, I find is something that, for me, we all find mentors. We all find people that maybe are in our profession or in our family or in our spiritual path. We find these people that we say, wow, I aspire to be a portion of what this person has blazed the trail into be. And when I think about St. Patrick, and I think about my own life, and I think about all of our lives and our journeys, I think, wow. Imagine how different that feeling of freedom would be from whatever thing or person or place or boss or situation or circumstance we felt oppressed by. Chances are it wasn't quite to the degree of slavery in the year 461 and what their rules of conduct were with how to treat a slave back then by a Druid priest in Ireland. But my guess is that what we endured wasn't quite what Patrick had endured. But imagine how many steps past forgiveness there are, past acceptance, past making peace with it, to get to the other side of it where we see the other person's perspective, the oppressor's perspective, and say, what can I do to make this right? Even though I have all the reasons of justification of why I feel the way I feel and why this was all wrong, did I do anything that you would view as wrong? Because if there is, I want to make it right. My mind has a hard time even conceiving that in some ways. But the other parts that I look at here is how different his life would have been had he not listened to that little voice in his head that said, get up right now, go to the ocean, there'll be a boat waiting. Two components there. One, clairvoyance. Two, faith. First, he had to have his mind quiet enough to hear that spirit voice telling him the direction that he needed to go and the when he needed to do it. But also, he needed the faith, because if he would have got to that shoreline and there would have been no boat, no way off that little island, imagine how much more poorly he'd have been treated as a runaway slave who then got caught and brought back again. So I imagine him in that moment, tending the sheep, doing what he was there to do, hearing that voice saying, go now. There'll be a boat waiting for you. And this isn't even a man of faith. This is a man who is a self-proclaimed atheist, hearing this voice in his head. So it wasn't like our perspective of, I know God, I know my angels, I know my guides. When I hear a voice, I know where that voice is coming from, so let me go follow it. Here's a guy who believed in nothing, who heard the voice that said, go this way, and have faith that that boat's going to be there. But he did it. But he did it. I imagine each step of the way where the forest is still here, because Ireland is so great, there's so much vegetation, that here's all this stuff that you can't even see the shore. And imagine step after step taking an action saying, I know I'm supposed to go this way, and I know there's supposed to be a boat, but oh goodness, I sure hope there is. Because if there isn't, then I'm not in a good place. But then also imagine the feeling as he came out of the clearing and onto the beach and saw the sails, saw the masts of the ship, just as it was promised to him. Oftentimes in life we forget about that part when we're hearing the guidance and we're trying to dismiss it away as just mind chatter, that it really is what it was promised to be. And we really can go there, and it really does exist once we get there. Holy buckets. Holy buckets. And oftentimes we can't see it from our perspective because we can't see the forest for the trees. We're so busy in our own lives. And we don't know how it's going to turn out. We don't know what the end of the story is going to be. Just as he had no idea what the end of his story was going to be, he knew that he needed to follow this piece of guidance to get to the boat, and the boat was going to take him back to England. Now imagine showing up, and imagine that boat ride over, back to your homeland, back to England, and all that's going through your mind is, holy cow. I heard this voice in my head that told me to do this thing, and I followed it, and it was exactly as the voice had said. And now I'm going home and I'm no longer a slave. But I'm an atheist. So that voice had to come from somewhere. Where'd that come from? And when the boat landed, I went into a monastery, went into seminary and said, let me try to understand what this voice is. Now, how many of us arrived at a relationship with God or a desire to better our spiritual understanding because we had a spiritual experience, we wanted to know where it came from. We wanted to understand it better. We wanted to get more in touch with whatever that was because it was beyond just what we could see and hear and taste with our physical body. I can only imagine Patrick going through that same journey of just trying to understand God, trying to understand where this voice came from and what this was all about, which led to seminary for many years. And his reward for getting this closer to God and this spiritual understanding is go back to where you were a slave. And go convince all those people who are hardcore pagans and druids that what they're doing is completely wrong and they need to do it this way, so change their faith. Now, how often do we, right, say, what are the three things you never talk about with anybody? You don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics, you don't talk about money, right? Because people have their own beliefs and they're going to stick to those own beliefs, and no matter which side of the aisle you're on, if you're a Democrat or Republican, you're probably not going to talk the other person into converting into your way of thinking. There are wars raged for hundreds of years because people of this religion are trying to convert people of that religion. Now this dude, St. Patrick, converted essentially an entire country of Ireland from paganism to Catholicism inside of 30 years, in the place where he was a slave. Now, I'm not saying that the conversion part is, yay! But what an amazing feat. There are holy wars raged for years and years and hundreds of years and decades and crusades and all these things to try to get people to convert from one thing to another thing, back to another thing again. And this dude knocked it out in 23 years. Now, if nothing else, that's a monumental feat. And so to look at the obstacles, the things that we want to accomplish in our lives, and we say, how can I accomplish these things? How can I do these things? Now we hear a little voice in our head that says, do this. Just go do this. And we go, whoa, you know what the chances of a boat being there are? Yeah, I'm already in a pretty bad situation. I'm not sure I want to make it worse. Because if I follow this guidance and that boat isn't there, I'm in a really bad place. But instead, consider the thought for just a moment that God is trying to take you out of whatever life you used to have or you're currently in, whatever circumstance, and bring you to a completely different set of circumstances, a completely different life. Imagine how different his life was as the slave and as the Bishop of Ireland. Whoa, just night and day kind of difference. Imagine how his days were spent differently, how people thought of him differently, how they treated him and reacted to him, and more importantly, how he thought of himself. And the difference of his connection, his spiritual life with God. Now, according to different legends, he raised the dead. According to different legends, he was an amazingly gifted healer. So many of the spiritual gifts that we talk about, being able to hear guidance, hear those voices, clairvoyance, healing, all these amazing spiritual gifts he had because he chose to follow the guidance when it came and when it mattered. And there are so many times in our lives that there was one movie that we watched, I forget how long ago, but I forget the title of it, but one of the main themes of the movie was, all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage to change your life. And it maybe only comes 20, 30, 2-3 times in your whole life, but that 20, 30 seconds of extreme courage changes everything. And we can think back to different times in our lives that we didn't think we could do something, and we got that 20 seconds of extreme courage that said, yes, I'm gonna, and stuff changed right in that moment, took a completely different direction. And I think about St. Patrick, at that time, having that 20 or 30 seconds of extreme courage that had him following that guidance, and as he started to, each step that he took was easier than the last step that he took. And this goes right into those Irish blessings that we started the quotes with at the beginning, that may the worst day of your future be better than the best day of your past. Each step we take as we're following God's guidance, as we're staying true to ourselves, creates a better existence, a better version of life, because it's a better version of us with a stronger relationship with God. My blessing to all of us is that we all get to experience that in this lifetime. A better version of us with a better version of God, a better understanding of the God that's there. That we would follow the guidance that's laid out for us and transform through it by embracing that 20 or 30 seconds of extreme courage when we really need it. Thank you.
This morning's meditation. You close your eyes and get comfortable in your chairs. For everybody to center their energy. Breathing in that breath of air, that peace, and let it flow through your body from the top of your head all the way down to the bottom of your toes. Allowing yourself to reconnect with spirit, reconnect with peace, and reconnect with your soul. Going to that spot that you feel most comfortable connecting with spirit, getting in touch with the sounds, the smells, and the sights around you. As you feel that connection, inviting spirit, inviting God, inviting your guides, all those spiritual energies, both physical and solely spiritual, that surround you, that are there to help. Feel yourself surrounded with support. And as you visualize your path of life, the path that you're walking, notice the support that you get along that journey. Being in touch with that support, allowing it to come in. And notice the direction that you're being guided to go. Is it the same path that you're walking, or is it a different direction? When you feel that guidance, do you feel like it lets you leap 10 steps forward? Or do you feel like you're resisting, that you're trying to hold yourself back? This morning, just let Spirit carry you. Allow that help, that assistance to come in, to move you forward, to allow that awareness to open up and direct your life, direct your path, and the goodness that life has to offer. Both spiritually and physically, alone and with others. does it feel to move forward and to allow that assistance in, to give you direction? And just like St. Patrick, when you feel yourself over the hill and on the other side of life, do you feel yourself come back to some of the things in the past? Or you just keep continuing your journey? There's no right or wrong, good or bad. Feel the appreciation, the gift that's given of direction and inspiration to help guide you along your journey. Embracing that energy, allowing it to flow through you even stronger, even more powerful and clear. If you were to be connected to that bigger picture, connected to God, connected to Spirit, what would that feel like? A bigger degree. Allow that energy to flow in. So if you're connected to that eternal extension cord, being able to plug in and allow information and energy to flow into your body, into your soul, into your mind. Receiving that energy and then taking action on the energy. Being connected with it at all times. And knowing that you have power to open it or to close that portal. And again, coming back into the center of your energy, just allowing that spirit to flow through, to reconnect with who you are. Being comfortable with that energy. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Come back. There are times in all of our lives when we need that little extra boost of inspiration or direction. And it's a good visual just to see that energy coming in and to reconnecting with it, knowing where you're going. And that soon, whatever you're walking through is going to be in the past. You'll be able to come back and look at it with a whole different perspective.